which is the way we treat our police officers in this country. I found it quite interesting. The Met Police Chief, Sir Mark Rowley, he was speaking out to the Sun newspaper, and what he was saying basically is that his armed police in the Met would rather face well-trained terrorists than gangsters, because apparently this all comes off the back of the worry about the split-second decisions that these guys and girls are making, and then what comes off the back of it, the whole kind of legal backlash and all the rest of it. He's saying basically he wants a fairer system. Because he doesn't like the fact, and he doesn't think it's necessarily fair, that these officers then face suspension and often as well prosecution. These are very split-second decisions. Where are you on this, Dawn?
Yes, I think we do. I think the frontline officers, excuse me, on the whole, do an incredibly hard and dangerous job, and I do think we need to look after them more. I remember covering the story of Mark Duggan back in 2011 now, and I still feel we're having the same conversations. The armed officers, they don't get any more. They're volunteers for that. They don't get any more pay for doing that job. And we have one case at the moment, PC Paul Fisher, who crashed his unmarked police car responding to a terrorist attack in Streatham. Now, he was found not guilty of dangerous driving, but the Independent Police Commission is now considering a gross misconduct charge against him, or case against him, and that is going on and on for nearly 4 years. Meanwhile, his life is on hold, his family's life is on hold. What we want, Michelle, is we want good coppers who go to dangerous places and dangerous people and stop them behaving in a way like that. But if we've got a police force that are worried in case they're going to end up in trouble, then that's putting all our lives at risk. It
is. Funny you should mention Mark Duggan. Whenever I hear that was an awful case. But I always remember now the riots. People
the Tottenham riots, yes.
And nicking trainers.
Yes.
There was going into the trainer shops. I will never forget that.
Yeah.
People nicking plasma TVs as well. Anyway, I digress. Michael, what do you make to this about the armed police?
Well, I mean, I think that discussion of the riots is actually sort of instructive because, yes, I mean, there were some people rioting who just wanted a flat-screen TV, but there was also undeniably sort of an awful amount of anger, frustration at the feeling that the police weren't held accountable when they sort of gave differential treatment to especially people of colour or just working class people in inner cities, because it was people of all races who were rioting, wasn't it? So I think this idea that the police are too accountable, that we are too strict with them, could be a risky route to go down, especially if we think about recent history. So we are just 2 years after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving armed police officer, in fact.
We are.
Very recently, David Carrick, one of the most prolific rapists in British history, who was serving as a police officer for 17 years, was convicted. Now, that is not to tar every police officer with these dreadful crimes, but I think this focus on should they be less accountable, should we let them get away with more, is potentially not where I think the emphasis should be right now.
But then do you think, right, because would you be an armed police officer?
No. I mean, I think it's important to know. It's similar as well with professions such as being a doctor or a nurse. If your job involves life and death decisions, then you are taking on an awful responsibility. It's the same with doctors and nurses. They can get tried or charged for gross misconduct because someone can die because of a decision they've made. And I am so grateful and relieved that I don't have to make life or death decisions in my job. And I do think it should be remunerated properly, right? So it does seem a bit odd to me that armed police officers don't get paid more, because if they are taking on a responsibility whereby they have to make life and death decisions, I don't see why they shouldn't get a little bonus for that.
Most of the cases that are currently going through with the Independent Office of Police Conduct now have been found not guilty in the criminal court. And most of them are actually found innocent by the IOPC as well. So, but I completely agree, Michael. You know, we don't want to be too soft on our police, but we also want police officers who are confident to go and tackle crime and go and tackle criminals on our behalf. And the Sarah Everard incident that you mentioned was absolutely shocking and appalling. But I think it's dangerous to tar all police officers with the same brush. I was talking to a mate of mine who happens to work for the Met, just an ordinary beat copper, and he was talking about policing the Palestinian peace marches and the anti-Semitism march. And he goes, there is so much onus on the men and women on the front line to make decisions. He goes, how do I know what is a racist chant or a racist placard? He goes, I'm just an ordinary beat Bobby from Essex. He goes, there is a lot of pressure on them from their bosses and also from us on the... They feel like they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't at the moment, and most of them do a very good job.
So what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting that the management don't have the backs of the officers on the ground?
I think a lot of them feel that way. I think Sir Mark Rowley has come in and hit the ground running, and hopefully he will change things around, Michelle. But I think there's an awful lot of ordinary officers now who are concerned that they don't have the backing of their own management.
And it's like the officer that was charged with the murder, I think it was, of Chris Cabba. That person, he's going to have... I mean, I'm trying to be careful with my words, but that person is going to have their anonymity removed. What do you think to that officer being named?
Well, there's not so much we can say about this because it's an ongoing criminal investigation.
But let's make it about the concepts of anonymity.
Well, I think it's important to note here. So there was a situation a few months ago where a number of police officers said, we're going to hand in our guns because this police officer has been charged for murder. And sort of the implication there was, you know, we're constantly working at risk of our freedom being taken away. Now, over the past 33 years, only four police officers have been charged for murder. And none of them have been convicted. So this idea that we are too tough on cops, I think is somewhat misleading. You know, I think the standards for charging a police officer for a crime such as this are presumably quite high. So I don't think we should make any judgments about, you know, this person might be being dragged through the mud, as it were.
Yeah, because I've got to say, I am quite uncomfortable with that whole... And I am being careful, because it's a live, active case. That's why we're all collectively saying we're being careful with our words. But the whole concept that you can be an armed police officer, you make the call that you, presumably at the time, you think is the right call, and then for your name then to be released... I worry about then the safety potentially of those, I'm making it generic, but the safety potentially of those officers in that situation if their name is in the public domain. And then I kind of think, what is the value in that? What is the value in
that is someone.
people?
So this is quite, I suppose there's two issues here, isn't there? There's one where it's a sort of internal disciplinary issue. So the IOPC, for example, that's an organisation which is specifically dedicated to investigating the police. The person charged with the murder of Chris Cabba, they're just in a normal murder investigation like any other member of the public, and it is the case.
Yeah, but that's my question. Should they be? Should they be treated? You're saying they're in this situation, so I'm making it more generic, not specific to the individual, but you're saying, that officer is, you know, up for murder, and therefore is being treated like any other member of the public, but should you be?
Well, it depends on this. Well, that's why it's difficult to talk about, because it depends on the situation. Obviously, if there's a split-second decision, you think your life is in danger, and you make one call instead of another call, then obviously the fact that you are a police officer in that difficult situation, you know, does put you in a more sympathetic light. But we don't know what happened in this situation and whether or not there is a reason whereby the Crown Prosecution Service think this Ron really is worth prosecuting his murder. I
just would not be a copper for love nor money. I would not. I don't think you get any gratitude from the public. I think you get thrown under the bus often.
By your own
you have
bosses.
a media that's just chomping at the bit constantly to undermine the police. But I think that a lot of decisions made by management doesn't help them. Hence, you get officers taking the knee and doing stupid things like policing tweets and telling people what you can and can't say. So I think that they just have the odds stacked against them.
I think they do. And I think the danger we're in now is losing good officers. Officers going, that's it, I've had enough, I'm leaving, either to go and work in private security or private law enforcement or even going abroad. There's an awful lot of Metropolitan Police officers in particular who have gone to Canada recently to work for the law enforcement over there. So I think we're in danger of losing lots of good men and women who are responsible for looking after us all, our safety. And it's, I think, the bad ones that will stay because they're the ones that aren't wanted elsewhere.
I think there is also the issue. So I don't think when people leave the police force, it's just because, you know, there's too much negative attitudes towards the police in the public. We've also got to remember there were dramatic cuts to the police services over the past 13 years.
Yeah.
And I was on this show, actually, I can't remember their name, but when the fella escaped from prison.
Daniel Khalifi.
Yeah, and there was...
Or Terror Man, if you watch that clip of Martin Daubney. No offence to Martin, I love him dearly, but I'll never stop chuckling at that. But anyway, Daniel...
There were lots of stories sort of in the news of people who worked in the prison service, and basically one of the problems they had is that all the experienced people left, because when you make cuts, one of the first things you do is offer everyone voluntary redundancy. So they offered everyone voluntary redundancy. All the experienced people left. You only had inexperienced people, and then what happens... Well, I'm not going to say that their behaviour caused this escape, but that was sort of speculation which was emerging. I think everyone agrees that working conditions and outcomes within the prison service are bad, and I wouldn't be surprised if similar levels of cuts means that we're seeing similar levels of struggles within the police force.
Well, there you go.